Hi there, period party listeners. In today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Lara Briden, a renowned naturopathic doctor and best-selling author of Period Repair Manual, Hormone Repair Manual, and her latest book, Metabolism Repair for Women. With over 25 years of experience in women's health, Lara has dedicated her career to helping women understand and navigate hormone-related health issues. She's also a respected figure in the scientific community, sitting on several advisory boards and authoring peer-reviewed papers. Lara is also this month's guest speaker in the Fix Your Period Collective, my brand new membership platform. And she's telling us all about the role of the autonomic nervous system in hormonal health, blood sugar's interaction with the menstrual cycle, and what you can do about low blood sugar and hypoglycemia. Go to fixyourperiod.com and use code FYP50 to join us for 50% off your first month of membership. In the Period Pillars, which is my signature course inside the membership, I walk you through blood sugar testing at home and at your doctor's office, along with highly effective blood sugar hacks that you can implement right away to see a difference in your health almost immediately. In this conversation that we're having today, we're going to delve into the critical topics of metabolic flexibility and insulin resistance. Lara will break down what metabolic flexibility is, why it's vital for our overall and hormone health, and how it differs from metabolic inflexibility. We'll also explore the signs and symptoms of metabolic inflexibility, how to identify it, and discuss the lifestyle choices that impact our metabolic health. Additionally, Lara will explain the concept of insulin resistance, its connection to metabolic inflexibility, and the serious health implications if left untreated. Whether you're struggling with hormone imbalances, PCOS, period pain, ovulatory pain, or irregular cycles, or you're struggling with mental and emotional health symptoms related to your cycle, this episode is for you. It is packed with valuable insights and practical advice from one of the leading experts in the field. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Lara. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Hi, thanks for having me again. How many times have I been on
I know.
your
I was
podcast?
I was just thinking about that. I think might be the third or the fourth time.
Yeah,
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 and
it's
it's
fun.
always a pleasure. Always.
It is. And we've met in person too. I always like to sort of acknowledge that when that has happened, because in our modern online world, it's not that common.
I know,
Yeah.
right? It really is not. I agree.
hmm
I know. I mean, we taught something together. We've
hmm
definitely, I feel like we're due though. I just saw a memory of that show up maybe on Facebook or something, and it was 2018. So we're going
Yeah,
into 6 years now. It's time.
yeah,
It's time for a reunion.
I agree. Yeah.
So you wrote this wonderful book. I'm going to pull this up because I had it
Nice.
open because I was preparing for this interview. And just so everyone knows, it's called Metabolism Repair for Women. And
hmm
it's such a fantastic book. And I've really loved delving into it in the last couple of weeks and learning even more about metabolic dysfunction and all the ways
hmm
to address it. And we were just talking about the fact that this is an underrated problem and it
Yes.
is affecting us in so many ways. In fact, I feel
Yeah.
like it's one of the biggest health crises of our time.
Well, a lot of scientists frame it that way.
Yes.
It affects a lot of people, probably
Yeah.
at least one in two adults, and probably more depending on who you ask. And it affects
Mm.
periods,
Yes.
yeah, it affects women's health. It affects mental health. It affects period health, perimenopause. Yep.
Yeah, perimenopause. Oh, we'll talk about that too. I hope. Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And when I think about just the fact that it's just sort of goes under the radar for the most part is what I tend to see more than anything in my clientele. And I
Yeah.
imagine that's the same for you too, that it's just this underlying cause of so many issues that we address the issues, but we're not really addressing this as being the driver of so many of them.
Yeah, like I give the example in the introduction where over the years, decades, had multiple conversations with patients where I say, look, I think you have insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction. And then they say, oh, no, it's fine. My doctor tested my blood sugar and it's fine. So I must be fine. It's like, no, that's not a normal blood sugar cannot rule out this problem. So I think that's been one of the stumbling blocks for people being able to sort of understand what's going on. In fact, often with insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction, there can be low blood sugar, which is sort of counterintuitive because we think of it as pre-diabetes or somehow associated with high blood sugar. It's both, actually.
Right. No, and that makes so much sense too. The sort of the inadequate testing, I suppose you could say, that happens, and then we're deemed fine and
Yeah.
then we move on to the next thing when in fact
Yeah.
this is the underlying problem. So I definitely want to talk about that too. And I was thinking that maybe we could just start with the term metabolic flexibility and what
Yes.
that actually means, because I feel like that's a newer term for a lot of people and it's now becoming very popular.
It is. I'm surprised to see every time I turn around, there's a new article about metabolic flexibility.
Yeah.
So I guess in a nutshell, it depends who's talking about it. Sometimes the scientists are talking about it in very technical terms in terms of mitochondrial function, but on a day-to-day basis, it's really the body's ability, the cell's ability to easily switch between burning glucose for energy and burning fat for energy. And so ideally metabolic flexibility, you should be able to move in both directions. But the more common problem with insulin resistance is people are kind of trapped in more glucose burning. And because the healthy metabolically flexible state would be actually that when we're at rest, our light movement, we're mostly fat burning as the default. And we should a little bit of carb burning as well, but we should only tip into more heavy glucose burning and therefore relying on glucose when we're doing intense activity. But with metabolic inflexibility, people get trapped into burning glucose. And what that translates into in real life is people running out of energy, just feeling like, oh my goodness, my blood sugar crashed. I'm hungry. I need to eat, a granola bar to keep going. And for them, it's not about, oh, can I exert the willpower to not eat this? It's like they literally like, I need to eat something to switch my brain back on and be able to get through the afternoon. And so that is a sort of the classic picture of metabolic inflexibility. And the important thing is it's reversible. It doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, no, I feel like this is so important because so many women are dealing with this, just
Yes.
this that not being able to eat for, or being able to having to eat like every
Yeah.
3 hours, or
Yeah.
yeah, or like feeling like they are going to have a crash at, 3 in the afternoon, or whatever it is. Like these are all
Yeah.
things that have become so ubiquitous that and so normalized that we don't think twice about it. But like you
Yeah.
said, it actually, your body is literally running out of energy, like
Yes.
gasoline.
Your
Yeah,
cells are running out of energy. And so
right.
if you see it through that lens rather than, focusing on, inability, it goes often hand in hand with inability to lose weight, but it's not exclusively about that. So it's not really about body size. It's more about this cellular energy and yeah, being able to feel good throughout the day.
Yeah. And so in terms of metabolic flexibility, what are what does that look like? What's the ideal, I suppose you could say?
Yeah. Well, I guess in simplest terms, being metabolically flexible means you can be comfortably and safely in that burning your body fat for energy between meals. Basically, it doesn't mean you're not going to get hungry when it's time for your next meal, because there's lots of signals around hunger, and it's normal to feel hungry when it's time for your next meal. But you shouldn't, yeah, we shouldn't have this sort of panicked feeling of I'm running out of energy between meals, because your body, even for people who aren't overweight, even just a normal weight person, there's quite a lot of body fat store there to harness for energy, and that's one of the reasons it's there. I mean, but fat actually has lots of roles in the body. It's part of a healthy immune function, um, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so helpful to hear that. And hopefully that there are already light bulbs going off for people who are
Yeah.
listening. And so in terms of just other signs or symptoms of this metabolic inflexibility or
Yeah.
not being able to, burn fat more
Yeah.
readily, is there anything else that people should be looking out for?
Yeah. So the first couple signs would be what we've just been talking about. Crashes in blood sugar, feeling like you have to eat frequently. That's the most common sign. There is a way, I mean, I touch on it in the book. And I'm not necessarily endorsing this device, but there is a device called Lumen that can measure fat burning versus carb burning. Have you tried that? Have you
Yeah.
experimented with it? Oh,
I have experimented with it. It
what's your
actually,
feedback? Yeah.
I really like it. And
Yeah.
I have talked to other practitioners who've really liked it as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, one practitioner friend who has been, working with patients for probably 20 years said to me that it really helped her address, in addition to
Right.
using a CGM, which I'm actually using right now because
Right.
I'm doing some experimentation. And so in addition to using that, she found it tremendously helpful to get blood sugar under control because going into perimenopause, she was having a lot of a lot of blood sugar problems that she hadn't experienced before. So she felt really strongly about it. I found it useful, but
Yeah,
I don't know that I delved as deep as she did with it, but I did find it very
yeah,
useful. And so if, like you said, if it's a tool that you can
yeah.
use, then it's great.
Yeah, so it's measuring just the ratio between carbon dioxide and oxygen. So it's literally measuring what, fuel you're burning at the time. There's always going to be a mix of fat and carbs, but it kind of can tell you whether you're skewed fat burning or carb burning. At different strategic times, I think they want you to test first thing in the morning and then after exercise to try to get a picture. And I tried it too, but I actually found that I could almost predict just based on how I was feeling, what kind of reading I was going to get.
That's so
So if
true.
I'd had, here's an example, like for me, if I was like, relaxed and had done some walking the day before and had a good higher protein evening meal and a good sleep, then I would wake up quite metabolically flexible and kind of skewed to fat burning. If I'd had stress or bad sleep or dessert, and I'm not saying dessert's always bad, but certainly dessert would definitely push me into the night before, would always push me back into kind of more skewed carb burning the next day. So I think I guess my point being, people can often tell, there's other ways to tell without necessarily investing in a device like that, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And then to continue, the discussion of how else might you know that you're dealing with metabolic inflexibility. I guess you can look at CGMs. So, I mean, you can look for the sort of real highs and lows with the blood sugar, which you can track with something like that. And I do talk about CGMs in the book. I don't use one myself just because I'm not a tracker.
Yeah.
I just full disclosure, for me, tracking gives me anxiety. And the only thing I ever tracked was my menstrual cycle. I thought that was quite empowering and fine, but I never tracked sleep. I never tracked anything else because I always felt like I was a test I was going to fail at. So just me, it's just my personality, I guess.
Yeah.
But so there's that. But then just day to day, like there's lots of signs you can get from just a basic set of blood tests from the family doctor or GP. So, and those would all be signs of insulin resistance because metabolic inflexibility and insulin resistance basically go hand in hand. They're not exactly the same thing, but having insulin resistance is one of the main causes of metabolic inflexibility, mainly because chronically elevated insulin impairs the body's ability to tap into fat for energy. It impairs a hormone or an enzyme called hormone sensitive lipase. I've got that right. So many technical terms in this space, isn't there?
So many,
So many
It's
enzymes and
overwhelming.
hormones and yeah. So in general, having lower insulin or better insulin sensitivity will promote better metabolic flexibility in the direction of being able to burn fat, which is what most people need to worry about. Technically, there is a metabolic inflexibility of being like skewed to fat burning, but that doesn't really come into the conversation for most people. So signs of insulin resistance on a blood test would be just simple things like elevated triglycerides. That's one of the first markers. Elevated is a marker called ALT, which is one of the liver enzymes, which doctors almost always test.
Yeah.
And so it's a really handy one to look at. And for women, that should be below 19. The units are, I forget the exact name of the units, but yeah, so it's the same units in all countries. So that's an easy one to look at. High CRP, high cholesterol. Those are all little flags that insulin resistance is probably going on.
It's so interesting you bring those up because I feel like they're all measured and it's very, consistently across the board at going to a regular primary care doctor.
Yeah.
But I've never ever had a client or a doctor even say to me, yeah, that looks like, the beginnings of insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction. I mean, that is never part of the
It's
conversation.
just not on their
No,
radar. It just
no, it's
has
just
not
like
been on.
cholesterol's high, so we're going to
Yeah.
potentially put you on cholesterol medication or you're going to change your diet, but there's no conversation.
No,
Yeah.
it's quite bizarre how not on the radar it's been. I think that will start to change. Well, here's another example. So elevated ALT is a marker of insulin resistance. It's also a marker of fatty liver, which pretty much goes along with insulin resistance. I mean, so I've had patients who have been told they have fatty liver, but no one connected the dots to that is probably from metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. And to be fair, there are other causes of fatty liver, so it's not that exactly straightforward, but in most cases, if there's fatty liver, it's from insulin resistance. I don't know what you think, Nicole, but I feel like the phrase itself, insulin resistance, is not not the best term for some reason. I've been doing this for 25 years. I find it just doesn't resonate with people. And I don't know if it's even just having the word resistance in the phrase makes people just think that sounds hard. That sounds like something that doesn't apply to me, or that maybe I don't want to think about. I don't know what it is. I've been trying to quiz different experts and practitioners. What would be a better term? I mean, I think metabolic dysfunction is probably a better term. It's more engaging. Metabolic inflexibility is probably a little more engaging. What
Yeah.
do you think? Have you had other experts describe it in other
Totally. I
ways?
mean, I refer to it a lot as insulin dysregulation
Yeah,
because that seems to resonate a little bit more.
yeah,
But I think ultimately insulin as a hormone has been so tied to diabetes for so long that someone
right,
who's 25 or 30
right.
or even 35 who's never had any signs of diabetes thinks this just doesn't apply to me. And that's, funnily enough, that's what I was talking about in this blood sugar module I was just creating
Yeah,
a few weeks ago, because I feel like that if you're hearing me say all this stuff, as I'm sure people are hearing you say all this stuff, they're like, what? This doesn't apply to me. That's
I know.
crazy, right? Because you might not have any outward symptoms, or at least symptoms that you even relate to the problem of insulin resistance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think it is the close tie through all the years of insulin equals diabetes, sort of those, somehow that connection. Because I had someone on social media say to me a few months ago, this was really a light bulb moment for me. I was trying to talk about insulin resistance again and try to say this, this could apply to you. It affects at least 50% of adults. So it's, very likely applies to a lot of people out there. And she said, oh, well, no, I don't have insulin resistance because my blood sugar is low. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Well, like actually reactive hypoglycemia is a symptom of insulin resistance. So right there, there's like, potentially a whole group of people who aren't, understanding or getting, hearing that this might apply to them. So this is really one of the main reasons I wrote this next book, is hopefully trying to reach the people who, really need it.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And I think that that ties into the testing that happens that is not adequate, and then
Mhm.
the interpretation of those results as being not adequate either. And
Yeah,
so people interpret it as not having a problem. And then
yeah,
obviously, like you said, they do. I mean, there's so much in the book about that, about like low blood sugar as
yeah,
being a potential problem.
yeah,
Meanwhile, people, they or associated with insulin resistance, like you said, and people think that that's not true. So,
yeah.
I get, like, one of my questions that I think people have a lot is, you mentioned it earlier, like, what is the difference between metabolic inflexibility and insulin resistance exactly? Like, how do they relate to each other? I mean, and then I guess what's causing all of this, what's driving it as
I
well.
mean, I would
Another question.
say, yeah, there are different ways probably to come up about to it, but I would say that I think the insulin resistance, the metabolic dysfunction kind of comes first and then impairs metabolic flexibility. And there are other things that can impair metabolic flexibility for sure, but I think in the most common scenario, that's what's happening, is um, the chronically elevated insulin impairing the body's ability to access body fat for energy, basically. And now, to be fair, on the topic of low blood sugar, there are different drivers of low blood sugar. So there are people, certainly, and I'm sure there's people listening today, especially young women, who do tend to low blood sugar but don't have insulin resistance. So there is, I mean, that obviously adds some complexity to the picture. And in that case, I'm going to be doing a teaching session with your group about hypoglycemia more generally and some of the different drivers, some that also are not just about insulin resistance. But I think given the fact that for a lot of people, especially when we're talking about metabolic dysfunction, the insulin resistance is the primary feature. That's where it's important to go through. In chapter 5 of my new book, I talk about the diagnostic criteria, including some that we just mentioned, the high triglycerides, the high ALT, potentially the high fasting insulin. So the hormone insulin can be tested as well. Is that something you're you would measure with your clients or that you have them look
Yeah,
at?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Either like a fasting insulin with their
Yeah.
doctor or doing an oral glucose tolerance test with the
Yeah.
insulin
With the insulin.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which has always been quite challenging because the doctors typically won't tend to test the insulin with it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you want to see the whole picture, not just half
Yeah.
of the picture. Again, it's just frustrating navigating the conventional medical realm when it comes to this kind of stuff because tying back to what we just said, it's always traditionally been viewed as a diabetics problem or a
Yeah.
gestational diabetes problem, and
Yes.
everyone else, you're good until you're
Yeah, I know.
diagnosable.
I'll just put a little bit of context around it because I measure insulin as well with my patients. I order either exactly what you just described, either fasting insulin or a more sensitive would be the oral glucose tolerance test where you measure insulin as well as glucose.
Right.
And it can be quite helpful. But one, as a general rule, if insulin is elevated in any of those scenarios, either above the normal fasting range, which is probably about 8 milli-international units per liter. I forget which units are used in the States, but anyway,
We
in my
use
book,
that
I talk
too.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, I use that
Yeah.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Or, at the 1 or 2 hours after a glucose reading, obviously insulin will be higher. It's supposed to go up after glucose. That's entirely normal. If it didn't go up, you'd be in trouble actually. So you want it to go up, but there's also a threshold for that upper limit as well. And if it's elevated to any of those points, that is insulin resistance. But the tricky part is if it's normal, that doesn't necessarily rule out insulin resistance. I wish it wasn't quite like that, but there are some scenarios where a normal insulin, there could be a normal insulin with insulin resistance. And it's actually just because of there's a few problems. It can either be the fact that it's depending on how the lab has handled the sample, insulin is quite subject to false negatives. And also it changes quite quickly. So as soon as people start doing any kind of, increased strength training or, reducing, avoiding shelter, as I say in the book, sheltering from sugar or all the good things, taking magnesium or all the good things you can do, insulin will tend to come down quite quickly, which is good. But it also means you might miss the picture of what was happening even just a few weeks earlier. So you might have someone who's quite prone to insulin resistance that has been their problem, but their current insulin rating is normal. So I just put that out there, just hopefully to guide people to take a broader look at all the parameters that I describe in chapter 5 of the book.
Amazing. No, that's so
Yeah.
helpful. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you brought that up because
Yeah.
again, right? There's never not nuance. It's what I've
Yeah, I
learned
know.
with human bodies.
I know
It's
someone
crazy.
needs to write a book called that. It's like, why so much nuance? Why does every single topic have to have all these little caveats? It's like, well, but in this case and in this case. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember having that conversation with you talking about PCOS, and you were
Yeah.
saying, oh, writing this part of the book was so hard
I
because
know.
your original book, because there are
Yeah.
just so many nuances, and
Yes,
the human body is what it is, and it's got a lot of variations. And unfortunately,
totally.
we've been taught to not view it that way, which really sucks.
It's two things. It's the human body has a lot of variation between individuals and even within the same individual. And then there's the fact that our descriptors of it, our kind of names we give to things, and PCOS is the best example, are quite broad and quite imperfect sometimes. And so very often we're using the same word to describe different people that actually have quite different things going on. So that's if people, everyone listening has heard conflicting viewpoints, which I'm sure they have, conflicting viewpoints on all sorts of different topics. That's part of why it's that old parable or the fable about all the blind men trying to describe an elephant, and someone's like, it's like holding the tail. It's like, oh, it's like a rope. It's like someone's, touching the sides. Like, oh, it's a wall. It's this. It's like, but they're all describing the same thing. But
So good.
um, yeah,
It's so true. I mean, it's really true. It's a little bit of
yeah,
the blind leading the blind. Um,
yes,
and that brings me to uh what I wanted to ask about like the causes. I mean,
yes,
generally, we could go to eating too many carbs, things like that. But can we talk through some of the main causes that's
yeah.
driving the blood sugar and insulin dysregulation?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this actually brings us to an important topic that I do talk about in the book, which is shame, because I think the other reason maybe this insulin resistance, as common as it is, as important as it is, as treatable as it is, like in some ways it should be the main thing that everyone has on their radar. I think some of the resistance to it is because people immediately think, it's from obesity, or it's from, doing the wrong thing, or following the wrong lifestyle. And that therefore this is like a badge of shame, I think, maybe for some people. And maybe not. Maybe, I mean, there's probably people listening for whom that's not true. But that's what I've observed with my patients. They immediately kind of get this look on their, when I say, I think you have insulin resistance, they kind of think, oh, I'm a bad person. I've ended up in this situation. And that is not correct. And that's not how it is. And in terms of what's driving this, I'll start with a really zoomed out view. Something has gone very wrong with the environment that is driving this, because 70 years ago, people did not have it. I mean, there would have been always some individuals. And to be fair, there's just with age, there's a natural, reduce over time, over the decades, there's a natural reducing of insulin sensitivity. So there's always been that, probably, that people into their later decades would start potentially to get some of these signs, but not like today, and not the young people today, not the teenagers that have fatty liver today, right? Like it's not that they're doing something wrong, it's that something very, not to use a hyperbole, but something very bad has happened to the environment, and it's having intergenerational effect. So your listeners might know about something called epigenetics. So that's genes being switched on and off, and then that is passed on to the next generation. So that's why we're getting teenagers with type 2 diabetes and fatty liver, because they were born that way, basically, from exposure of their immediate ancestors to this environment. And I give the example, I mean, I was a kid in the 70s. My diet, to be fair, my diet wasn't terrible. We had lots of good things happening, but I would eat like Oreo cookies, and like, I was not like, teenagers have always eaten junk food. Like, that's certainly not always, but certainly going back a couple generations, we weren't, there was not the insulin resistance in young people back then that there is today. So it wasn't that immediate. It's not like, a few years of eating junk food and Oreo cookies immediately causes it. It's because we were more resilient, because we weren't set up for it the same way young people are today. And scientists are scrambling to figure out what's going on and why this is amplifying generation by generation, and what is going so wrong. And depending on the scientists, they all think whatever they're studying is the thing, right? So just to give an example, like the microbiome changes are definitely affecting this. There's pretty compelling research that circadian rhythm disruption is affecting it, and also environmental toxins. So I provide a citation in the book that one scientist estimates that probably at least 15% of the current epidemic of metabolic dysfunction is directly from environmental toxins. So I mean, I prefaced it this way just to say to people listening, this is not your fault. That's why I called chapter 1 of my book, metabolic dysfunction is not your fault. It doesn't mean there's nothing you can do about it, but it's not necessarily just from, choosing the wrong foods or doing the wrong thing. It's much deeper than that. And like a lot of things, right? Like this, PCOS would be in the same category. We're seeing a amplification, like a frequency of polycystic ovary syndrome that previous generations just did not have. Yeah. To be fair, that's going somewhat parallel and hand in hand with insulin resistance, because the two conditions are quite linked. But yeah, there's a lot going on. And the food supply is a big part of it. It's the ultra processed. Just to give an example, some scientists think it's to do with our heavy exposure to what are called acellular carbohydrates. So it's carbohydrates that have lost their cell wall. So, what happens apparently when these ultra refined carbohydrates, when they enter the gut, they just categorically fail to signal all the normal like satiety hormones and that's supposed to happen as they go through, and they fail to send the satiety or satiation signals to the brain. And at the same time, they feed bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine, which generates all this inflammation, which we know for sure promotes insulin resistance. So yeah, that's a
like
double
a whole
whammy.
cycle, right? Yeah, I mean, like it's just compounding it.
Yeah, emulsifiers in processed food. There's potentially high dose sugar. I talked about that a little bit. There's vegetable oils. So who have you interviewed so far on your podcast about seed oils or vegetable oils, or where does that fit
I mean,
in
I
your?
feel like it's come up a few times, and
Okay.
I would love to hear your take because I feel like there have been a few people who've really been banging that drum for a long time now,
Yeah,
and I think they've taken a lot of heat for it, particularly from the more mainstream scientific
yeah,
community. But I feel very strongly. I mean, I remember having clients during the pandemic who said to me, you know, I didn't eat takeout food anymore because I wasn't working or I
yeah,
wasn't going to the office. And so I
yeah,
was cooking for myself, and all of a sudden my period pain disappeared.
yeah.
I wasn't cooking, I wasn't eating any of these seed oils anymore. They were generally eating the same kinds of foods. That they were just, whether they were out or cooking at home. And that was like the one major change. And multiple said to me, I'm not having as bad migraines. I'm not having much period pain. I'm like, okay, that's really interesting. I mean, there are multiple factors that can contribute to that, of course, but I thought it was interesting, an
Okay,
interesting
well,
observation.
let's do a 5 minute explanation.
Yes, let's hear
Let's
it.
start with this. So I've avoided higher dose vegetable oil for quite a long time. Although I do eat restaurant food, so I know it's coming in to restaurant
Yeah,
food. So I just
same.
accept that. Like I can't. I'm not that careful that at home I cook with olive oil, butter, or coconut oil. How about you? Do
Same.
you
Absolutely.
same?
Same. I know. I struggle with
Yeah,
the restaurants, but it just is what it is. Most of the time I'll eat
yeah,
something that isn't deep fried or cooked in
yeah,
oil potentially. It's more baked or something. But yeah,
yeah. So, and in terms of the controversy, oh my goodness,
it's a
it's like
lot.
so
It's a
controversial.
lot.
Okay, so and it's become this very combative area, but it's debate. But just broad strokes, we're talking about high dose omega-6 fatty acids, which are a type of polyunsaturated fatty acid, which are essential fatty acids. So there's that. So there's the fact that it's an essential nutrient. So it's obviously not bad. Like it's not like bad like a toxin or anything. It's something that the body does certainly expect to have in a moderate dose. The problem in the research is just the sheer amount, which is possibly, depending on what people are eating, if they're eating ultra processed food, it's like 20 times higher than they ever had before. And it's in ratio to omega-3 and also potentially in ratio to saturated fat. So I think the research is vast and various conflicting studies, but my read of it through my biologist lens is there's something going on. I think the high dose omega-6 is doing something I think it's potentially promoting insulin resistance or contributing to that. I think there's one study I cite in the book where higher dose polyunsaturated to saturated may actually be reducing metabolic rate in humans collectively, which is not proven, but an intriguing idea. And there's a saturated fat that I mentioned in the book called C15, which is a 15 carbon chain saturated fat, which apparently has these like incredible metabolic benefits in terms of promoting healthy metabolic flexibility and insulin sensitivity. And so even just the sheer, like if that's been removed and replaced with polyunsaturated fats, then you're just straight out missing the benefits of that type of saturated fat. So anyway, there's definitely something going on. And obviously both you and I do avoid vegetable oils. So there's something, and actually a lot
Everyone
of the
I
people
know
in the health
does.
space do.
Yeah.
Everybody does.
They
Everybody. Okay.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I haven't, everyone, and I got my mom to switch from canola oil over a decade ago. I don't
Yeah.
feel like this is necessarily a new thing. And if you look at the processing of those oils, I mean,
Yeah.
that alone should tell you they're quite unstable. They can become rancid pretty fast. I
Yeah.
mean, that you mentioned the driving of the inflammation, as we
Yeah.
know, right? The inflammation impacts
Yeah.
the blood sugar and the insulin dysregulation. So I just feel like there are multiple levers at work.
Yeah. And also just for everyone, like for context, that doesn't mean I avoid nuts or seeds. Like I actually do eat quite a few
Yes.
walnuts, and you could get omega-6 from some whole grains, which I do eat, and nuts and various other places. And that's fine. Like not no one, but most people are not saying those things are bad. It's
Yes.
more, it's, as you say, it's the like sunflower oil, it's the soybean oil that's in everything. It's the corn oil, but
It's
anyway,
bad.
was
I
that five
know.
minutes? We said
Yes,
we
I
won't
know,
spend more
right?
than that.
I feel like my line around this for anyone who asks is nature didn't invent harmful or bad foods. It's the man-made stuff that's the
Yeah.
problem, right? Because those omega-6s, like you said, they're needed by the body. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of how much and what form they come in. And so
Yeah.
that's how I see it. I agree with you with the nuts and the seeds and all that stuff. Unless
Yeah.
like you have some kind of allergy, then
Sure.
you don't need to avoid all of that. But
No,
yes, but there are the zealots I know that are like, no nuts and seeds at all.
I know.
No seeds, no nuts, no oils from those foods.
No.
So I know it's a little over dramatic, but thank you for that explanation though of like
Yeah.
all the potential triggers and causes, because I feel like it is vast, and I think it can feel very daunting. And I know that your approach has always been that of simplicity, which I always really admire, because I'm like, no, wait, we've got to go down all these different rabbit holes, ladies.
Mm.
And whereas you're just like, no, you can do this really simply. And I just love that. And I feel like it's really come across in your books. And so I am
Okay.
curious from you. Yeah, I mean, totally. But I am curious from you, where you start typically with your patients, or what you're recommending generally, as a starting point for someone who is like, oh, wait a second, I think I might have some of these problems.
Yeah. Well, the book, and I was really pleased. I value your feedback. I'm really pleased like that you said I managed at least some degree of simplicity for people, because to be fair, this topic, even compared women, I thought women's health was complex,
Yeah.
but metabolic health is, yes, I'll just acknowledge that it's a very complex topic. There's lots of hormones involved. There's lots of moving pieces. And there was a tweet from which I really liked, from Chris Palmer. I don't know if you follow him. He's he's a psychiatrist. He wrote a book about metabolic health for mental health, and
Oh,
I cite him. I
amazing.
quote him a few times in my book. He said, we probably won't fully, and we collectively won't fully understand metabolic health for a century. Like, he's probably right. Like, there's so many little unknowns, so many nooks and crannies where there's still big question marks. But broadly, the approach I took in the book came out of my work with patients, which is, as you know, in the book, I have 2 chapters, getting what you need. So that has to be a starting place. So if there's something, there's like, 10 or 12 things of what you just need. And that's non-negotiable. And that includes things like movement and outdoor light and social connection and getting enough protein and nutrients and like all the kind of obvious things. So obviously with my patients, if there's something pretty major they're not getting, then that is a good starting place. And then beyond that, it, like everything, like in women's health, there has to be some degree of troubleshooting, because not everyone's the same. And the priority change that people need to focus on, it will depend on, like, for some people, for example, I give 2 patient stories in the book about how gut health, I felt like for that patient with gut health was their main obstacle to being metabolically healthy. So we focused on that and we just treated the gut.
Yeah.
And in one of the patient stories, by doing that, her sugar cravings just disappeared spontaneously, which is, and because I've been asking about various other natural health practitioners, like, how many times have you treated someone's gut with just a course of maybe sometimes, low FODMAP or berberine or something like that, and then they spontaneously just lose 10 kilos, like without even like actively doing anything. So here's the thing, here's the takeaway, I guess, from my book, and is fix your general health and you'll fix your metabolic health. This is the same, right, for my other works. Like, so, in Period Repair Manual, fix your health and you'll fix your period. This is because periods are not separate from general health. Metabolic health is not separate from general health. It's not like metabolic health has its own, category and set of do's and don'ts. Like, it's part of everything. So and gut's such a common one. So if digestion problems, if SIBO is present, that's a priority. Another metabolic obstacle for some individuals might be alcohol. I mean, that's not a very fun one to talk about, but for some people that alcohol does promote fatty liver and increased visceral fat. And even though in the past, unfortunately, alcohol has been held up as being somehow healthy, that's all falling apart now.
Yeah, I just saw another study about that. Like,
yeah,
no amount of alcohol
no.
is considered good for you, everyone, just so you know. That's the latest research.
Yeah. And
But
to be
yeah,
fair, full disclosure, I had a beer last night after my mountain hike. So,
oh, no doubt. I still have
yeah,
drinks too. But
yeah,
yeah, but like we talk about this, and I feel like we both talk about this,
yeah,
that you have to be an inquiry about how much you're drinking and
yes,
why you're drinking it, and without any shame, obviously, but just
yeah,
really objectively looking at, what are you using this to cope? And I think for women especially, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but
Yeah.
we're using it to cope with our lives, the
Yeah.
overwhelm and the frustration that so many of us are experiencing,
Yeah.
particularly mothers in this country,
Exactly. And
especially.
it's understandable to need something to feel better. And again, it's about framing the conversation in a way that doesn't involve shame, that doesn't involve like scolding people or finger wagging. It's not about that. It's an opportunity to think, yeah, this is an obstacle. And so what can happen to, feel better in other ways? As I just use the same word for alcohol. So I talk about sheltering from ultra processed food, sheltering from sugar, sheltering from alcohol for that individual to whatever degree they need to shelter. And not everyone needs to shelter in the same way, but yeah. So alcohol is an example. Another example of a metabolic obstacle that needs to be addressed to correct or improve insulin sensitivity would be thyroid disease, which is super common in women, right? That's another one. Certain types of hormonal birth control impair insulin sensitivity and metabolic flexibility. So there's different opportunities to tackle different metabolic obstacles. And I do encourage people to not try to do everything at the same time. Like my patients could never, maybe there's some out there, superhuman ones who can tick every box and just be like, right, I'm going to have perfect, exercise. I'm going to have perfect meals. I'm going to have perfect but most people have to just kind of start with a few things, fix that. And then it does become, you can build on that, right? So once you correct, for example, if you correct a gut problem and then your mental energy feels better and you're not craving sugar as much, then yeah, the next step becomes a lot easier. You can do the other things. Might feel like moving more, getting up and getting some morning light and all the things. So
Those are so good. And I love what you said about not being superhuman or even trying to be superhuman.
no,
And right. And just like tackling one thing at a time. And I
yeah,
also really appreciate that perspective too, because I think that so much of women's experiences are driven by this desire for weight loss,
yes,
particularly in our culture. And it's so challenging because they're not really addressing the things that are causing them to gain the weight in the first place. They're doing more of the surface level approach. And what you're saying is that there are multiple contributing factors, whether it's underlying gut infections or gut
yeah,
dysfunction, or I mean, there's the whole stress component as well,
yeah,
and how much that drives the blood sugar problems.
yeah,
So there are all of these sort of unexpected or surprising things that contribute, which, I love that you just tackle all of them. And then also
yeah,
you say, you don't need to do this all at once. Like you actually
yeah,
can't. It's very difficult to do that.
yeah. And I think I guess also with the book, I don't promise a certain amount of weight loss. I don't know how anyone can actually like promise
Yeah.
a schedule of like, just because as we were saying, people are so different, bodies are so different. I mean, very different, 25-year-old, I think in my book, the patient story who got the fastest weight loss was a 20-something-year-old with PCOS, and she just managed to quickly, she did all the things, like she felt better, all the metrics that I'm asking people to check, and she did lose quite a lot of weight in her case, but not everyone can do that. It's a 45-year-old is going to have a very different trajectory potentially. And so I do invite people to use as their first metric that they're tracking the duo combo of feeling more energy, so feeling zest, as I talk about in the book, and better satiety, so less hungry between meals, just generally feeling more satisfied. That's the first sign, and that's a really good sign that things are improving, even if the scale's not changing. Even if the measure on the waist isn't changing yet, as long as that's improved, that's like step one. And then I guess if you could also track some of those metrics we've talked about on the blood test, like if your triglycerides are coming down and your fasting insulin is coming down, that's a really good sign. And it's hard, I know, to sort of just trust that when you actually, I guess if weight loss is the goal. But I guess what I've found with 25 years of patients is when those metrics start to improve, longer term weight loss will follow. It just will. I mean, there'll be a change in body shape longer term. And I guess I've never been able to, as a clinician, put a timeline on that. And I'm always surprised when people say you can lose this many kilos in 4 weeks. I'm like, how? Like, how do they say that? Because
And how could you promise that?
I don't understand how that works. Like, not when the body's a biological system. Yeah,
I know. I agree with that completely. I know I'm
yeah,
always in awe of these people. I'm like, wow, you're bold
yeah.
to
That's a
be
bold
able to say
statement to
that,
say.
right? Yes, exactly. When you're dealing with all these different bodies. I
Yeah.
know, it's so true. This was so, so helpful. Are there any final thoughts or anything you'd want to share with anybody who's listening who might be thinking, oh man, I gotta get into this blood sugar thing?
I guess I always, yeah, it's the truth for all my books and all my work is trust your body. Like the body wants to be healthier. You don't have to fight your body. Like it will. I know some of the stuff I've been talking about, getting what you need and, sheltering it sounds a little too gentle to work, but it can, like your body will, if it feels better, it will get there. And I guess hand in hand with trusting your body is, not just realizing it's not your fault and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And it's just something that collectively a lot of people have been, well, I guess I would say subjected to from the terrible things that have gone wrong with the food environment. So I hope that helps people find a way through and a way forward and know they can. Yeah, I've had so many patients say to me, oh, I must be the toughest case you've ever seen. Like I'm broken, I can have, and I'm with periods too, right? They're like, well,
Yes.
people will say, well, that might work for other people, but I'm really broken. And I would say, no, like there's always a way to feel better. I mean, maybe you're not going to get the results of some, shiny, skinny Instagram influencer, but that's not what the goal is. That it's not. The goal is just to, yeah, improve all those markers, have more energy. Yeah. Yeah. Feel
Absolutely.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you. It's just it's a real realistic take, and I think that that's what everybody wants. They just want the truth more than anything. And like you
Yeah.
said, I love what you said about um taking a more gentle approach. I think a
Yeah.
lot of us have tried to beat our bodies into submission, and it
Yeah.
hasn't really worked very well. I can definitely attest to that. I was a
Yeah.
child of the 80s and 90s. So I know, but I just feel that we've got to try a different way, and
Yeah.
your approach is amazing. So thank you.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to just tell everyone about the book and where they can find this one, and obviously your other books as well.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks so much for another great chat. So I'm easy to find. Everything's at larabriden.com. All my social media is at Lara Briden. So the book we've been talking about is Metabolism Repair for Women. And yeah, it's the third in the series of Period Repair Manual and Hormone Repair Manual. And they're all available from Amazon and just Barnes and Noble and all the usual places, or you can request them in your local bookshop. And I think I'm happy to do a giveaway with your audience if that's what they'd
Yeah.
like. Yeah, an opportunity for that. So
We
yeah,
will do that.
find a
We will
way.
do that on social media for sure when this comes out. I'm very excited
Great.
for that. Amazing. Thank you again, Lara, so,
Yeah.
so much. This was such an
Yeah.
excellent conversation.
Yeah.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.